My pleasure now is to introduce Kengo Miyazono. Miyazono is correct, right?
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Thanks.
Thank you. Kengo is an associate professor of philosophy at Hokkaido University. His main research areas are philosophy of mind, philosophy of psychology, and philosophy of psychiatry. I met Kengo on one of an online phenomenology forums in Europe, and I was really interested. I became really interested in his work because he works, if it's correct to say, Kengo, you work on the cusp of phenomenology and analytic philosophy. And what we are trying to attain by means of phenomenology, he does analytically. So I'm very interested in your talk, and welcome, Kengo. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So, okay. Does this work? Is this working?
Great.
Okay,
Good.
and you
Good.
you should have people online also. Yes, I think I hear people joining in already. So there is part of the audience is here live and part of the audience is online.
Good, good. Okay, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's an honor. It's really great to be participating in this workshop online. As Olga correctly mentioned in my introduction, so I am doing analytic philosophy of mind, psychology, and psychiatry. So these are my areas. I have been working on these areas for a while, and then recently I started working on religious experience because I think that the religious experience is very, very interesting for people like me coming from philosophy of mind and psychology and psychiatry. So today, what I'm going to talk about is what I call non-sensory religious experience. I'll explain what I mean by this in a minute, but I start by talking a little bit about the thing I worked on. I did work before I started working on religious experience, because I think that's a nice way of introducing where I'm coming from and the reason why I'm interested in religious experience, in particular non-sensory religious experience. So in the beginning, in the first half, or not the first half, but in the first part of my talk, I'll talk a little bit about my background, and then I move on to the main part, which is about non-sensory religious experience. So that's what I'll be talking about. Okay, so imagine you are now looking at a stone on the sand in front of you, something like this, the real thing just in front of you. And then you pay attention to the phenomenal or subjective qualities of your experience, and you try to see what kind of quality are you aware of in your experience. On one hand, you are consciously aware of sensory phenomenal qualities like the quality of color, the quality of the shape, quality of the texture. The subjective qualities associated with those sensory properties like color, shape, texture. So that's one kind of phenomenal or subjective quality you are aware of. But here's another kind of subjective quality you are aware of, which is it's not really about the color or shape or anything, any sensory property of the object, but it's more about the subjective impression that this thing, the stone, and its properties like shape and color are presented directly before your mind. You have this sensory impression that here's something which is just in front of you, which is this thing is presented in front of you. So that's the second kind of subjective quality that I'm interested in. So that's a second kind of subjective quality here. So now, in general, visual experience of something X involves, first of all, sensory phenomenology, SP for short, concerning X. So that includes the sensory phenomenology of color, sensory phenomenology of shape, sensory phenomenology of texture. So these are sensory things. And here's a second thing, which is on the face of it, different in kind from the first kind of phenomenology. So I call it presentational phenomenology. So that's the kind of phenomenology which has to do with this subjective impression that here's something in front of you, which is directly presented before your mind. So that's presentational phenomenology, PP for short, concerning X. So lots of philosophers of mind working on philosophy of perception. Many people talked about the distinction that I introduced to you, the distinction between sensory phenomenology and a presentational phenomenology. So this is Scott Sturgeon talking about subjective quality of experience, the visual experience. He says he's talking about the situation where we are looking at a moving rock. So he says that your visual experience will place the moving rock before the mind in a uniquely vivid way. He's talking about presentational phenomenology, by the way. Its phenomenology will be as if a scene is made manifest to you. Such a phenomenology involves a uniquely vivid directness upon the world. And he also says visual phenomenology makes it for a subject as if a scene is simply presented. Verildical perception, illusion, hallucination seem to place objects and their features directly before the mind. So that's how Sturgeon characterizes presentational phenomenology, PP. So in general, so here's my definition, something like definition of presentational phenomenology. So that is the subjective impression that some worldly objects and their properties are directly and immediately presented before the mind. Lots of people talk about this, but they use different terminology. So here's a footnotes on different people talking about like using different terms to refer to this. But I'll stick to presentational phenomenology as my term for referring to this. Okay, I'll skip this. Now, you might think that some people might think that PP is actually presentational phenomenology is reduced to sensory phenomenology. So that's what I call reductionist position. I think that, so for example, you might think that the presentational phenomenology is just a strong sensory vividness. I think the best candidate for somebody who actually holds this view is David Hume. I'm not entirely sure Hume really held this view, but I think he's a very good candidate for it. So for example, Hume says that impression, which is his term for sensory experience, among other things, impression differ from ideas, the concepts, thoughts, and beliefs, in the degree of force and vivacity. So for Hume, the difference between sensory experience and a conceptual thinking is just a matter of degree of force and vivacity. So that's kind of reductionist view, namely the sensory experience, sensory experience, which has presentational phenomenology, is just something which is really vivid. Sorry, the presentational phenomenology is just a strong force and vivacity. I think that's one possible reading of Hume. Now, what I'll be talking about today, what I'm interested in this project is I'll try to argue against the reductionist view. And then to do so, what I'm trying to do here is to establish the double dissociation between SP and PP. So one kind of dissociation is the SP without PP. So you have sensory experience, you have the impression of color, shape, texture, but you don't have the presentational phenomenology. So that's one kind of dissociation. And then second kind of dissociation, so that's basically the opposite. So the second kind of dissociation is PP without SP. So you have this subjective impression of directness in immediacy, but you don't have any sensory experience. You don't have any sensory awareness of it. So that's the second kind of dissociation. And in my project, so this is a big project, and this talk is a part of this big project. So in this big project, I have on one hand, I argue that the so-called derealization, so that's a psychopathological phenomenon in the depersonalization disorder. So that's a symptom of depersonalization disorder. So derealization experience is that counts as the first kind of dissociation where you have sensory phenomenology without presentational phenomenology. The second, the part is where I will argue that, so this is something I'll be focusing on today. So what I call non-sensory religious experience, that counts as the second kind of dissociation where you have presentational phenomenology without sensory phenomenology. So so that's the big project. The first part is about the first kind of dissociation. It's about derealization. I'm not gonna say much about that project because that's a little bit off the interest here. And I'll be talking about the second part, where I'll be talking about the second kind of dissociation, and it's about non-sensory religious experience. Yes. But let me say just a little bit about the first part, because I think that's a nice way of motivating the project in the main part. So I think I'll say, I'll skip here. Yeah. So I have 3 sections, but I'll skip the first, the section 1, because it's about derealization, that the first kind of dissociation. I'm not gonna say much about that. I'll be very quick there. So that's the first section. And the second section, I'll be talking about the second kind of dissociation, the presentational phenomenology without sensory phenomenology. And then I'll be talking about non-sensory religious experience as an example of that kind of dissociation. The third part is about the possible epistemological implication of non-sensory religious experience. I think my talk in the second part, the second section, has some interesting epistemological implications, and I'll be talking about that in section 3. That'll be very quick in section 1, and I'll spend most of my time in section 2 and 3. All right. So derealization. So what's derealization? So actually, I published a paper on this. So that's another reason why I'll be quick here. So what is it? Derealization. Derealization is a symptom of depersonalization, derealization disorder in DSM-5. And then, so this is the definition of DSM-5, the definition of derealization in DSM-5. So that's a strange experience, which is characterized by a feeling of unreality or detachment from or unfamiliarity with the world, be it individuals, inanimate objects, or all surroundings. The individuals may feel as if he or she were in a fog, dream, or bubble, or as if there were a veil or glass wall between individual and around the world. So this is a psychopathological condition in depersonalization, derealization disorder. And I'll skip these things. And then, so here's my claim about what is going on in derealization disorder. So my interpretation is that subjective reports of derealization, so they say things like, I am in a bubble, I feel as if I'm in a bubble, or I'm in a fog, or there's a glass wall between me and the things in the world. So they say these kind of things. And in my interpretation of all of this is that these subjective reports of derealization are the metaphorical expressions of visual experience without presentational phenomenology. So the idea is that they are, in their visual experience, they are aware of sensory qualities. So they can see the color, they can perceive color, shapes, texture, other things, all the sensory phenomenology perfectly fine, but somehow they do not have this subjective impression that these things are directly and immediately presented before their mind. And in a metaphorical way of communicating this weird experience is to say things like, I am I'm in a fog, or I'm in a bubble, or I'm detached from the world. Because once you lose presentational phenomenology, basically you lose the subjective impression that things are directly and immediately before the mind. And then once you lose that, what you get is this weird visual experience where you feel as if you are detached from the world, or somehow the relationship between you and an object is not immediate. So somehow mediated, or like there's something in the middle. So that's what they are trying to communicate in their subjective reports. So that's my that's my interpretation, or that's my hypothesis about what is going on in derealization. So I call it missing PP hypothesis, And then I have an argument for this hypothesis. Basically, I'll argue that this hypothesis gives the best explanation of derealization and its subjective reports. I'll skip the argument part. So if you're interested, you can see my paper. All right. So if I'm right, I'll skip these. So if I'm right, then at least we have the first kind of dissociation, namely the experience where you have subjective phenomenology, so you are aware of shapes, color, texture, and other sensory qualities, but you don't get presentational phenomenology. You don't get this impression that these things are directly presented before the mind. So that the first kind of dissociation, you have the real example of the first kind of dissociation, which is derealization. Now, in the second part, so this is the main part. So I'm interested in the dissociation in the other direction. So I'm interested in, if any, the cases of presentational phenomenology without sensory phenomenology. So the kind of cases where, if any, you get the impression that something is presented before your mind, but you're not aware of any sensory feature of it. So you don't have any like sensory quality. You're not aware of any. The color. You're not aware of color, shape, texture. You're not aware of any sensory quality of this thing. And then I will argue that what I call non-sensory religious experience fits the bill very, very nicely. Now, so here's my central hypothesis about the second kind of dissociation. So it's pure PP hypothesis, which says that some religious experiences involve PP, presentational phenomenology, concerning a religious entity, possibly, without sensory phenomenology concerning the religious entity. So you have this impression, subjective impression, that there is something just in front of you. It's presented before your mind, but you're not aware of any sensory feature of it. So that's my hypothesis about some kind of religious experience. That's non-sensory kind of religious experience. And then I think I can run a similar argument for this hypothesis, similar to the argument I appealed to in the context of missing PP hypothesis about derealization. So that's inference to the best explanation argument for this. But I have a question mark here because this is a work in progress. I'm still working on it. But anyway, so I said some religious experience involve PP without SP. So the question is, what are these some religious experience? So this hypothesis focuses on a non-sensory type of religious experience where two conditions are satisfied. And one condition is that the subjects are aware of the presence of a religious entity of some kind. And second, subjects disavow any claim to seeing or hearing with bodily sense organs. Okay, so okay, so that's what I call non-sensory. Yeah, so that's what I call non-sensory religious experience. So non-sensory religious experience is a religious experience that satisfies these conditions. So if you look at Williams James Varie-ties of religious experience, I think I don't quite remember the exact chapter. So I think that's lecture 4 or 5. I don't quite remember, but there's a lecture titled something like "Reality of the Unseen" or something like. Maybe like some of you remember like which chapter I'm talking about. So there's a particular chapter. There's a particular lecture, or in the book, which is dedicated to non-sensory kind of religious experience. Yeah, so here's one example from James' book. So the quote, "The person affected will feel a presence, definitely localized, facing in one particular way, real in the most emphatic sense of the word, often coming suddenly and as suddenly gone, and yet neither seen, heard, touched, nor cognized in any of the usual sensible ways." So it looks as though this experience here, James is talking about, satisfies two conditions that I talked about. So on one hand, the person feels the presence, direct presence of some religious entity. On the other hand, he denies he or she denies any sensory awareness of the thing. So my hypothesis, PPH, pure PP hypothesis, nicely explains that on one hand, just like normal visual experience, like the normal visual experience of a stone on the sand, non-sensory religious experience involves a strong impression or presence of the religious entity. So in a normal visual experience, you have strong impression of direct presence of, say, a stone on the sand. In non-sensory religious experience case, you have a strong impression of the presence or direct presence of a religious entity. So there's a analogy between non-sensory religious experience and normal visual experience in terms of the presence, the subjective sense of presence. The second, on the other hand, unlike normal visual experience, subjects deny sensory awareness. In the stone case, you are aware of sensory quality of the stone, the color, shape, texture. But unlike that kind of case, the standard visual experience cases, in the non-sensory religious experience cases, you deny the sensory awareness of the religious entity. And my hypothesis, the pure PP hypothesis, nicely explains these facts. On one hand, what is happening in non-sensory religious experience is that on one hand, you have presentational phenomenology. So that's something common between non-sensory religious experience and normal visual experience. In both cases, you have presentational phenomenology, the subjective sense of presence. On the other hand, according to my hypothesis, the non-sensory religious experience doesn't have sensory phenomenology. So that's the reason why the person denies any sensory awareness of the religious entity. So my hypothesis nicely explains this pair of facts about non-sensory religious experience. I have some other cases as well. Okay, so here's another case from James, and again from the same chapter of the book. So quite early in the night, I was awakened. I felt as if I had been aroused intentionally, and at first thought someone was breaking into the house. I then turned on my side to go to sleep again, and immediately felt a consciousness of a presence in the room. And singular to state, it was not the consciousness of a live person, but of a spiritual presence. I do not know how to better describe my sensations than by simply stating that I felt a consciousness of a spiritual presence. So again, the person is experiencing a strong sense of presence or direct presence. It's similar to the standard cases of visual experience. On the other hand, the person denies any sensory awareness of the object. So he denies any seeing any color or any shape. He denies any listening of any sounds. He denies any tactile sensation. He doesn't have any sensory awareness of the object. So again, my hypothesis nicely fits this case as well. Again, okay, here's another case. When all at once I experienced a feeling of being raised above myself, I felt the presence of God. I tell of the thing just I was conscious of it, as if his goodness and his power were penetrating me altogether. I think it well to add that in this ecstasy of mine, God had neither form, color, odor, nor taste. Moreover, the feeling of his presence was accompanied with no determinate localization. So it's, again, the person denies any awareness of form, color, odor, or taste. He denies any sensory awareness of God, but he still feels the strong sense of presence. So again, my hypothesis nicely fits this case as well. Yeah, it was rather as if my personality had been transformed by the presence of a spiritual spirit. But the more I seek words to express this intimate intercourse, the more I feel the impossibility of describing the thing by any of our usual images. At bottom, the expression most apt to render what I felt is this: God was present, though invisible. He fell under no one of my senses, yet my consciousness perceived him. Again, the person so the person says that this experience is very, very different from any ordinary experience. It's very hard to describe it. And he says that the God fell under no one of my senses. He denies any sensory awareness of it, but still he is conscious of the presence of God. All right. So again, okay, these are all coming from the James book, a particular chapter. I think that's the reality of the unseen. I think that was the title of the chapter. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know, but a particular chapter. All these examples are coming from a particular chapter of the book. All right. Now I will come into the last part of my talk, which is about epistemology, epistemological implication of what I said so far about non-sensory religious experience. Now, in general, if you're interested in epistemology of religious experience, how, if any, how and whether religious experience can justify our belief about religious entities and their nature. We can think about two different ways in which you can approach this question of the epistemological feature of religious experience. So one is what I call reliability-based approach. So here you are interested in whether religious experience can be a reliable indicator of religious entity and their nature. So that's a reliability-based approach. And the second approach, that's what I'm interested in here, is a phenomenology-based approach. So here, what you are interested in is, so you're not very interested in whether religious experience is reliable or not. Rather, you are interested in whether religious experience has a right kind of phenomenology, which can have justificatory efficacy. So the reliability-based approach is naturally associated with reliabilism in epistemology, and a phenomenology-based approach is naturally associated with the phenomenology-based epistemology of perceptual experience in general. The most famous version of phenomenology-based approach to the epistemology of perceptual experience is dogmatism. So dogmatism is a view by Prior, among others. So the idea is that the perceptual experience in general, perceptual experience can justify belief not in virtue of its reliability, but rather in virtue of its phenomenology, it's having a particular phenomenal quality. And the one particular version of dogmatism is what I call PP dogmatism. So that's the view that the reason why perceptual experience can justify belief is because it has presentational phenomenology. So that's a form of dogmatism, which says that the kind of phenomenology which is crucial for justification is presentational phenomenology. So the reason why the visual experience in general can justify beliefs is because they have presentational phenomenology. So they have this quality that the things and their features are directly presented before the mind. So that's what I call PP dogmatism. Now, so I'm interested in the phenomenology-based approach, and I'm interested in PP dogmatism in particular. So that's a phenomenology, that's a version of a phenomenology-based approach. Now, suppose you are interested in, suppose you accept a PP dogmatism. So, so once you accept that, what is crucial for an experience to justify a belief is whether it has presentational phenomenology or not. If it has it, it can justify beliefs. If it doesn't, it does not justify beliefs. So that's the implication from PP dogmatism. Now, on the first kind of dissociation case, so I said that in derealization, what you have is SP without PP. So that's my claim, my hypothesis about derealization. Assuming that I'm correct about that, and assuming PP dogmatism, you have to say the implication is that the PP, this experience in derealization does not provide prima facie justification. By the way, I should have said that the justification the dogmatists talk about is prima facie justification. The meaning that it's a prima facie in the sense that it could have been, it could be defeated by some defeaters. On one hand, I said about non-sensory religious experience that it involves presentational phenomenology without sensory phenomenology. Assuming presentational PP dogmatism, the implication seems to be that this kind of religious experience, non-sensory experience, does provide a prima facie justification because it has PP, and PP is the thing that gives you prima facie justification according to PP dogmatism. So again, so this is James' case. And again, so in this kind of case, I'm not going to read it again, but it's the same case that I presented a while ago. So in this kind of case, according to PP dogmatism, and if my interpretation of this case is correct, the person is prima facie justified to believe in the religious entity, whatever it is. So that seems to be an implication of PP dogmatism. So again, if we accept PP dogmatism and my account of the non-sensory religious experience, that it follows that the person in that case is prima facie justified in believing the existence of a supernatural entity, whatever it is. Again, as I said, this is just prima facie justification, meaning that it could be defeated by any defeaters around. And then there are roughly two possible kinds of defeater. One is the doxastic defeater. So that's a belief, basically. So when you have belief, which indicates that the target belief is either false or unreliable. So if you have this kind of belief, then your justification can be defeated by the doxastic defeater. The normative defeater, on the other hand, is a proposition which is first true, and the person ought to believe, and that indicates that the target belief is either false or unreliable. Now, question is whether, so now, assuming that everything I said so far about the epistemology of religious non-sensory experience, non-sensory religious experience is correct. Now, the next question is whether the prima facie justification, which is provided by non-sensory religious experience, is actually defeated by either doxastic defeater or normative defeater. And then again, that depends on case. So like the different cases, that's different in different cases. Now, so my question is this: can there be at least some cases in which there's no defeater, either doxastic nor normative? So that's my question. Because of course, it is obvious that there are some cases where you have doxastic defeater, and some other cases where you have normative defeater. Of course, there are those cases, but the question is whether can there be some cases in which there is no or defeater at all, doxastic or normative. Now, about doxastic defeater, I think clearly it is possible that person with non-sensory religious experience has no doxastic defeaters at all. So the person does not believe. So for example, doxastic defeater is something like the belief that this experience is not reliable, it's weird, you shouldn't believe, or anything like that. So you have maybe any atheist belief, skeptical belief about religious experience or something. It is possible that the person having this experience doesn't have any these atheistic defeater belief at all. Now, how about normative defeater? Normative defeater. So one candidate, normative defeater is a proposition rather than the person's belief. So what is the possible defeater here? So one possibility is that the proposition that the religious experience here is just a product of some brain activities. Now, it's true. Again, the normative defeater has to satisfy three conditions. One, true. The person ought to believe. The person might not believe, but the person ought to believe it. And the three, that indicates that the target belief is either false or unreliable. The question is whether this thing, the candidate one, satisfies all these conditions there. I don't think this proposition indicates the unreliability of the target belief, because even if this proposition is true, so this experience is just a product of some brain activities, it doesn't indicate the unreliability of target belief because, you know, I mean, like any psychological processes happening in your head is probably the product of some brain activities, but it doesn't mean that the psychological processes are unreliable or not. I mean, like your I don't know, your reasoning ability is a product of some brain activities, but it doesn't mean that your reasoning ability is not reliable. So I don't think that this proposition indicates the unreliability of the target belief. Now, the second candidate, how about something like this non-sensory religious experience is just a glitch in the brain? First of all, is it true? I'm not sure. Like that's the first condition, the truth condition. I'm not sure this is true. And then even look at setting that aside, I don't think that people ought to be aware of the fact that even if this is a fact, I don't think that like all of people ought to be aware of the fact that this religious experience is just a glitch in the brain. But then like condition 2 is not satisfied. So either way, it looks as though these candidates do not are not very good as the defeater that as the normative defeater. So the problem here, so what I'm trying to say here is just that. So then it looks as though at least there could be some cases in which there's no doxastic or normative defeater at all. Because there's no reason to think that in all cases in which you have non-sensory religious experience, you have at least some doxastic defeater or normative defeater. There's no reason to believe that. So but then like, there can be some cases in which you have the non-sensory religious experience and you don't have any doxastic defeater or you don't have any normative defeater at all. All right, as a summary, I talked about double dissociation between SP and PP. SP without PP, the first kind of dissociation, derealization is a good candidate for it. The second kind of dissociation, PP without SP, non-sensory religious experience is a very good candidate of the second kind of dissociation. In the third section, I talked a little bit about epistemology of non-sensory religious experience, given PP dogmatism. So that's a view that's a prominent view. I think at least that's a popular enough view in epistemology of experience, the visual experience. Non-sensory religious experience prima facie justifies the religious beliefs, which might or might not be defeated. Yep. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you very much. Questions, please. Okay, Mike.
Thank you for your presentation. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you? Yeah.
So, it was very good. I really enjoyed it. I wonder if this idea of the PP really might be the whole discussion could be put in a broader framework of saying, for instance, the idea that the PP may have to do with pragmatic engagement with an object in the everyday life world, where I can really touch it or it can act on me. That's part of the presentation that makes it real. It's beyond sensory presentation. I think that I agree with you. But then if you see the different kind of finite provinces of meaning, as Alfred Schutz talks about them, the kind of without the sensory perception without PP is kind of like a state of dreaminess or madness or something like you're in a different province of meaning. So also in the religious experience, it's a different province of meaning. Schutz talks about modifications of the pragmatic everyday life. And I would say, yeah, that religious object seems able to act on us in some way, right? Without having, you're right, no sensory, but it is able to kind of act on us and evoke a reaction. And we feel like we could respond to it in some way. So it modifies the pragmatic everyday life. That's just a suggestion of maybe seeing it in another broader framework without denying what you're saying.
I see. So just to make sure I understand your proposal, so you are suggesting to interpret or reinterpret what I call presentational phenomenology from pragmatic perspective or something. So it has to do with the like acting or interacting. Am I right? Is that the suggestion?
Possibility of acting too on it, or it acting on me.
Yeah. That makes sense. I think that makes sense. Yes. But I think that makes a lot of sense. Although my worry of reinterpreting the proposal in that way is that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense when we talk about the presence of some agent, like God. But it doesn't make much sense when we try to make sense of inanimate object. So because I try to draw the analogy between the standard visual experience of rock or whatever objects in front of you and the and non-sensory religious experience. So I try to say that the PP is the commonality between everyday experience of things which is presented before the mind and the God or something like that. So but this practical interpretation of this thing nicely applies to the experience of agent, which can act on us and we can interact. But I'm not sure about the inanimate object. Yeah, so I don't know. I'm not sure I'm not sure what that actually amounts to. Maybe that means maybe I'm wrong about that. I'm not wrong about the analogy, but I'm not sure. Yeah.
Thank you, Lawrence. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks. I found this really fascinating. I do have some qualms about some of what you're doing, and some of that has to do with what you're doing with James. It's lecture 3 for those who are wondering. Quotes are coming from in the varieties of religious experience, and in that chapter, he's codifying and interpreting 2 types of experience. The first type are hallucinations, which are not necessarily religious, and the second type are mystical type religious experiences that share with hallucinations what you're, I think, accurately interpreting as phenomenal perception without sensory perceptions, right? The challenge is, I think, you're doing something much more general than what James is doing in that chapter, right? So not only can you explain those kinds of experiences that he's talking about, but you could potentially use this to explain a whole lot of other things as well. For example, I think of a whole lot of other kinds of religious experience as having perceptual, phenomenal perception without sensory perception. For example, it could ground a theory of transubstantiation, right? That you could have phenomenal perception of divinity in the elements of bread and wine without sensory perception of eating flesh and blood, right?
That's right. That's right. That's right.
So,
yeah.
So you're doing something much more general than James, which is fine, but I think getting clear about how that could work is important.
Great.
The bigger problem, I think, comes when you then move to using this to try to justify religious beliefs. That comes from the fact that we do have these hallucinations that are not a priori understood as religious. And then we have the people that believe that that go in to these experiences believing that what they're perceiving is religiously significant, right? So I'm not clear on how this is supposed to justify religious belief. I can see how it's, in a sense, confirming an already existing belief that these things are religiously significant. But that's different than justifying, right? Because you could be wrong about that going in. And so just the fact that these are phenomenally that they are PP without SP, I don't see how that gets us to justification.
Good, good. So about the first issue, I think you're perfectly correct about that. I think you're right about that. But also, the reason why I try to limit my cases to these cases in the lecture 3, so that lecture 3, so is because in other chapters or in other books and papers on religious experience, actually in lots of other cases they have sensory qualities, so you can hear so like people say that you can hear the God talking to me, or you can see some light or something. So the lots of other cases of religious experience with some sensory qualities. So I don't want to talk about these cases. So that's the reason why I focus on these cases in chapter as well. But I think you're right about that. About epistemology, I think I have two options. One is just to bite the bullet in the sense that even in those house neatly cases, you are actually justified to believe in religious entity. It's just that maybe it's false, but it's a false. But the false belief can be justified. So you can be justified to believe something false, or you prima facie justified to believe in that kind of things, but you have some defeater that cancels out your justification. So that's one option that I can take about what I can take about dealing with that kind of case. The second option would be to say that those cases are, although these cases are similar, there are some phenomenal differences between them. So maybe the house neatly cases do not have PP. They are kind of similar, but actually they don't have PP. So that's the reason why it doesn't have justificatory efficacy or something. I think I need to look at the the cases more carefully to determine what's the best response to the kind of cases. But I think there are several options available. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, yes, yes. Or just a second. Let me let me make an announcement about timing. What we can do, we have one cancellation. So we can continue with discussion. If Kengo, if you have time to stay with us a little bit longer, we can continue your talk. It was very interesting. And then our next speaker will come with a little bit of delay, like maybe 15 minutes, 20 minutes, as opposed to us calling it quits now and switching to the next talk. Okay. So we have about 15 more minutes at least for discussion. Yes, Peter.
Hi, thank you for the talk. So one question I have is just about whether these kind of experiences you're considering are presentational in the same way that ordinary perceptual experiences are. So just thinking about the quotes from James, the description of presence was often kind of qualified, so it's a spiritual presence or emphatically real, or as if sometimes it was localized, sometimes it had no determinate localization.
Right,
so,
right.
So I guess I think it's there's a reason why these kind of experiences call for the term presence. And so I think it makes sense to talk about them here, but I wonder if they involve phenomenal presence really in the same way that perceptual experience does.
Yeah, so right. So I think my reasoning is something like this. So I'm coming from because very standard visual experience, and then we know that the standard ordinary visual experience can give us the sense of presence or direct presence of the object. And then the reason why the standard visual experience can give us this impression is because it has PP. Well, at least that's the assumption. So because standard ordinary visual experience has PP, that's the reason why we've got subjective impression that the thing is directly presented. Now, so assuming this is right, and now we look at the religious cases like this one, the James talked about. Now, people, if we trust the testifier here, so they are strongly convinced by the presence of something, and it looks as though the phenomenal quality of the experience seems to be responsible for their commitment or their conviction of presence. Now, why is it that this experience, non-sensory religious experience, can give you or to give the person this conviction of the presence of something? I think the most straightforward hypothesis is because just like standard visual experience, which can give us the impression of presence, this experience also has basically it has the same quality. So that's the reason why, just like in the standard cases of visual experience, this religious experience can give us the conviction of the presence of something. So I think that's a very straightforward, simple hypothesis about what's going on here. Of course, that's not the only possible interpretation of what's going on here. Maybe we can think of these kind of cases as something slightly different from ordinary cases, but I don't know. So far I don't have any strong reasons to think that this case is different. at least when it comes to the presence, the impression of presence, is different from ordinary cases of visual experience. Yeah.
Just really quick, I mean, if it's an experience of a non-localized presence, at least in one of those cases, that seems like a pretty distinct kind of presence.
Right. Yeah. But so so localization, no localization. So I think my interpretation is that by this means so basically this indicates the absence of sensory features, because sensory features are localized in your at least visual sensory features are localized, like a shape. You have a shape in a particular location in your visual field. You have some particular color in some particular location in your visual field. Once you don't have any of this, the sensory quality, no localization. So that's my interpretation of it. I'm not sure that's the that's the best interpretation of it.
Well, just actually, did you consider haptic perception in your model? Haptic perception, perception of sense, tactile, of flesh. And then the second thing I think is to consider is interoception. It's an integrated sensory modality, which I think may be responsible for dissociation because integration fails. Yeah. Okay, there was Bill.
Yes, thank you for the talk. Very stimulating. On the epistemological question, I just wanted to remark that Descartes had a similar criterion in the Meditations. That which is clear and distinct is necessarily true. But,
right. That's right.
And so that follows from the earlier comment of how something could be, belief can be justified if it's clear and distinct in the mind. However, he also did have a doxastic defeater, which was the evil demon. And he had to overcome that, which gets into a tautology. But it's an approach with a grand historical, credential. But my real question is about, in Husserl, he talks very often about modes of givenness, and that objects are given in certain modes of presentation. I don't know that I understand that entirely, but like something can be given in a mnemonic mode and you accept it as memory, not as perception, because of its mode of givenness. And, something that's given in a mode of imagination is not confused with something that's given immediately to the senses. What is the mode of givenness of God? I mean, are we confusing the mode of presentation with a description of the object?
Good. Yeah. So I think I agree with I think I like your analogy with Descartes' clear, distinct perception. I think there's an analogy there. I'm not super familiar with Husserl. I'm sorry about that, but I think I get the kind of idea you're talking about, the mode of presentation or something. So I think because I know I'm not super familiar with Husserl, but I have some friends who work on Husserl. They talk about something like this all the time, so I have some second-hand knowledge of it. So I think that's the reason why I like the analogy as well, the analogy to Husserl as well. In fact, some people who talked about presentational phenomenology, so they refer to Husserl as somebody who is committed to something like PP, the presentational phenomenology. So I think that maybe that's related to the mode kind of idea there. In my proposal, so the question, the last part of your comment, the question, my proposal about God or religious entity, experience of religious entity is not at least when it comes to the presence, when it comes to the presentation of phenomenology, the mode or phenomenology is actually the same as standard visual experience, because standard visual experience can give you presentation of phenomenology that has presentation of phenomenology. So that's the reason why it gives us the sense of presence. And religious experience, the presence of God, experience of God, has the same thing, the PP. So that's the reason why it gives us the impression of the presence of God. So at least that's my proposal. So maybe they share the same mode, or at least they share the same feature, because of which they give us the impression of the presence. Yeah.
One more, last one.
All right, just a quick question before I get into kind of like the meatier question. It seems that you're defining sensory primarily in terms of the five physical senses. Would you say that is the correct understanding?
As opposed to?
As opposed to, and this is kind of in the meat of the question, it seems like the concept of PP could almost apply as long as we're only defining sensory, phenomenology, right? It could apply to almost any thought in my mind. I could have the idea of justice in my mind, and that could have presentational force, but there's no sense of it because it's a pure idea inside of my head. Why is it then that, and so if it is simply in a sense something that I could conceive of and it can have this presentational force that values often have for people, why do we even need to identify, on the one hand, non-sensory religious experience as one of the major paradigms for PP without SP, and on the other hand, your example of the normative defeater, where it is, a brain process or a brain glitch, why can't it just simply be my own idea?
Okay. Okay. So I'm not entirely sure I get your question. So did you say sensory phenomenology? So I think, are you saying that it's too narrow to understand sensory phenomenology in terms of five senses? Is that your main point?
At least insofar as identifying a non-sensory religious experience sort of specifically with this, ability to avoid a normative defeater, like it was just my idea.
Okay. I think if I can add, I believe that Husserl admits luminosity of consciousness, and if this is so, then consciousness can build on itself. So he introduces types of intuition like eidetical categorial, which are not non-sensory, but they have some presentability by means of consciousness illumining itself. But then, of course, it's not clear what will be the originary givenness. So it's a complicated question, but I has presentability which is different from sensory mode.
I see. So maybe there can be something other tan SP and PP. So there's something else, and maybe religious experience has to do with that thing rather than PP. Is that?
Yeah,
that may be a possibility.
Yeah, but what I think we can do, if you will be open to it, we can just take it into some kind of a webinar format and just continue the discussion. We'll be in touch on this.
Okay, great, thanks. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thank
It was
Thank
really
you. Thank you, everybody.